Jonas Hale knew he was being displayed the moment the palace doors opened, because nobody in the sapphire court of Veles looked at him like a guest. They looked at him like a story they expected to laugh at later, the rescued human. The rough mechanic pulled from a broken shuttle by Princess Alira's private ship. The alien princess had lured home a human, perhaps for amusement, perhaps for scandal, perhaps because royal life had become too polished. Alira did not deny it. She sat on her crescent throne, but Jonas paid less attention to the nobles and more attention to the floor, because he had spent his life around failing systems, and the palace beneath his boots felt wrong. The vibrations skipped, lift platforms settled late, vents sighed out of phase, tiny signs, almost too small to notice, unless survival had once depended on hearing a machine die first. And when a jeweled lord joked that humans fixed ships with scrap and curses, Jonas kept quiet because a darker truth had already landed in his gut. Something deep under the court was failing, and failing on purpose. They thought the human had been brought for spectacle. They did not realize he had arrived in time to hear the palace screaming first. Alira noticed him listening instead of performing, and her amusement turned into focus, because unlike the rest of the court, she had not rescued him for novelty alone. She had seen him patch a ruptured life support line with bare hands and borrowed metal while drifting half-dead in vacuum, and she recognized competence. So during the eclipse banquet, Jonas leaned toward her and said the stabilizers below were cycling wrong, not from age, not from stress, but from interference. And Alira believed him quickly enough to matter. She took him beneath the feast halls with 2 guards and 1 engineer, down into the root chambers, where the sapphire court was held aloft by harmonic cores older than the ruling bloodline. And there they found it, sabotage hidden inside perfection. 3 stabilizer rings cut so finely diagnostics had missed them. A 4th rig to trigger cascade failure during the Emperor's eclipse assembly, when the entire high court would be gathered in the upper dome. 1 elegant collapse, 1 falling palace full of judges, heirs, and children. Then the lights flickered, the floor lurched, and the engineer whispered that recovery would take at least an hour. Because Jonas looked at the failing core and understood the brutal truth before anyone else. They did not have an hour, they had minutes. And Volition systems were too refined for emergency improvisation. Every repair assumed precision, every protocol assumed calm. While Jonas had been trained by vacuum, fire, debt, and the human art of making ugly things hold, the game was over. Now survival belonged to whoever could abandon pride first. When the royal engineers arrived, they brought tablets and panic. Jonas brought action. He ripped open conduit housings, stripped live wire with burned fingers, used a guard's spear as a grounding rod, bent ornamental silver into a crude bridge lattice, and built the kind of bypass no academy on Veles would approve. The engineers protested that it was barbaric and unstable, and Jonas snapped that unstable was better than burial. Then Alira made the choice that changed the empire. She ordered everyone to obey the human, and that command shattered a century of arrogance. Through the palace network, she turned his rough instincts into law. Cut decorative grids, dump eclipse mirrors, shift masts to port ballast, open throne anchors, evacuate upper luxuries, move children and injured toward cargo sectors. And suddenly, the Sapphire Court stopped pretending it was above labor. Nobles who had mocked Earth were dragging counterweights through cracking halls, ministers were forcing emergency locks, guards were carrying civilians, and the palace still kept sinking. Enough to make every elegant life inside it understand gravity had finally entered the room. Jonas bought them seconds with 1 bypass. Then more with another. Blue fire climbed the conduit walls. 1 guard was thrown into a pillar. Crystal rootways split with sharp cries. And all the while, Alira stayed beside him, relaying orders with a voice that never shook. This was the moment they stopped laughing at the human and started measuring how many breaths he could still buy them. Then the final core lock fused shut, and every system display turned the same warning color. There would be no full recovery unless someone reached the exposed resonance. Spindle threw a maintenance rail too narrow for armored guards, too hot for drones, and too unstable for anyone with sense. Jonas did not deliver a heroic speech. He simply saw there was only one path left, but before he climbed onto the rail, Alira caught his wrist and asked, "Why save a court that treated you like a toy?" And Jonas gave her the answer only a human like him could give. Because decent people are still trapped up there. Because rotten systems are not the same as everyone inside them. Because if I can stop the fall and choose not to, then I become part of it. And for the first time since he had met her, the princess looked stripped of rank, only afraid. Then she let him go. And Jonas rode the rail into the white glare of overload, jammed a shattered spear half into the manual release, pulled until his gloves burned through and his hands split open. And when the spindle finally slammed back into alignment, the stabilizer screamed, caught, and held. The palace shuddered, dipped, and rose, ugly, damaged, smoking, but alive. And by dawn, the saboteur had been found, a minister who thought collapse would clear his path to power. The emperor still breathed, the court still floated above the storm world, and every noble who had watched the rescued human with amused contempt the night before now stood silent as Jonas crossed the great hall in torn sleeves and blackened hands. Then Princess Alira stepped beside him, not above him, and spoke the line that would outlive the jeweled thrones of Veles. We invited a human to marvel at him, and instead he reminded us what strength really is. Not perfection, not blood, not beauty, but the will to hold when everything worth saving is about to break. And from that day onward, Jonas Hale was never again called the princess's curiosity, because history had already chosen a better name, the man who kept the sky from falling.